Without any further ado, I'd like to now introduce our first speaker, because our first session takes the really important question: how can cardiovascular patient organizations grow and professionalize? And we know this is at the heart of some of the questions that you ask yourself. Whatever size organization you're in, there are challenges about moving to the next stage. And we're going to be very honest in our conversation today and learn from some different experts about the different stages they've been through. So first of all, let me introduce Dr. Elisabetta Notarnicola, who's the Associate Professor of Practice, Welfare and Social Innovation at the Bocconi School of Management in Italy. And she has a very detailed expertise of organizational development. She's going to share the story, particular story from Italy, to see how we can take inspiration from it. Elisabetta, the floor is yours.
Hello, Tamsin. Thank you for your introduction, and good afternoon or morning to everybody. So today I would like to tell you a story that is the story of Comitato Maria Letizia Verga. One pretty important association and now organization that operate in the north of Italy, specifically in Lombardy, that is the biggest region in Italy, in the north of Italy. And the story of this comitato started with the creation of a patient association, and now lead the group to manage the biggest pediatric hospital in Italy. So before starting with the full story that start back in the 80s, I would like to give you some elements so to understand who we are talking about. So today, after 42 years of operation, this institution, this organization has reached some very important results and important numbers. So more than 2,000 little children that have been treated and then taken care within the different institutions of the organization. A lot of families involved, a big and important budget dedicated to research and care activities. So the core business and the core activities of this association and our pediatric hospital is oncological care, and specifically pediatric leukemia. So they operate in this field. And well, they both offer hospital care, but also community care and also social support to families that are experiencing illness of their kids and are experiencing a very tough time in their life, as you can imagine. So they call themselves a system, and the name in Italian is System Monza, since Monza is the city where they are based. They call themselves as a system, and this is a pretty important thing, because they started with a single association, but now there are a number of organizations, since it remained the original association, but after that they have created two foundations. They have a stable collaboration with the local public health authorities and the local public hospital. And they have some collaboration ongoing with the local university. And in fact, they host different university courses. So they put together different pieces of the community where they're based, bringing together not-for-profit institutions and public institutions. So to offer, let's say, a full experience to children and families that are living specific condition. Also, they operate in the field of pediatric care more in general, so not only leukemia, but pediatric care more typical and more general. Their story began back in the early 80s, where they started as a group of 6-7 families that share a very touching experience. So the experience of having their children hospitalized in the same center in the city of Milan. And there was a very bad experience, since when being there, they were feeling like that their inner needs weren't taken into consideration. So their children were treated as patients, but not treated as kids with a family. So they decided to constitute themselves as an association, and the name of the association and the full name is Comitato Maria Letizia Verga. So Maria Letizia was the name of the patient number one of this association, and the family of Maria Letizia were the beginner of the association. So they established themselves as an association, and well, the initial aim was just to have a voice, to be able to speak up with the hospital where they were experiencing the hospitalization of their kids, just to make aware the hospital of the fact that having their families and little children was not something usual. So back in the 80s, pediatric hospitals were not existing in Italy. So they were in a general hospital with no specific competence in treating children. So the initial goal was simply to have a voice and start to do some fundraising, also to support the spread and diffusion and also access to some innovative treatment. Also dedicated to palliative care, since back in the early 80s, leukemia was something that led to a very negative final situation. So I don't want to mention that because it's really sad, but at that point in time, the idea was not to have better treatment, so to overcome the illness, but to have a good end of life for their children. But then things evolved, so they had the possibility to be connected due to some individual relationship and also due to the voice that the Parents Association obtained in the first 3-4 years of operation. So they had the possibility to be in touch with a very innovative research hospital, again, a general hospital, not a pediatric one, but they first had some contacts with the Monza, the city where they now are based, research hospital. And this was a shift in also in terms of the aims that were pursued by the association, because from that time on, the focus really shifted from palliative care and having a voice to look for specific innovative treatment. And so the research vocation and the research mission started to be more clear and also relevant for the association themselves. So they started the activities of fundraising, and they started to have an active role also in pushing with public institutions, so to have the creation of a first pediatric unit inside the general hospital. So it took 10 years, more than 10 years, 15 years to achieve that. But early 2000, they managed to have the first pediatric unit within the general hospital. And this was combined also with the need to change their organization, also due to the fact that through the years, the number of parents that were associated to the association was increased a lot. So moving from a couple of 6-7 families, no more than that, to 20, 30, 40, and so on. So they needed to have a more structured organization, and they established a foundation. And the first foundation, that was Fondazione Tettamanti, the first of the two foundations that were established in that period, were dedicated to research. It was not only managing the budget, but also managing the research lab. So they established a research group and a research lab dedicated to leukemia and pediatric leukemia and innovative treatment. Very soon after this event, they also created a second foundation, the Foundation Monza Brianza per la Mamma e il suo Bambino, that means the Foundation for Mothers and Children and Pediatric Care for the city of Monza. And here the mission of this second foundation should be clear, because this second foundation acquired the direct control of first the pediatric unit, and then it was changed into a pediatric hospital thanks to a specific partnership arranged with a local general hospital that donate a big building to this newly born foundation with the idea to enlarge the pediatric unit and have a pediatric hospital, not only to treat leukemia, but to serve the families of the community where it's based. The fourth initiative was the also creation and management of a community care center that is mainly an accommodation for family that are leaving the hospitalization of the children, so to allow them to live and stay very close to the hospital. And you have to keep in mind that back in the early 20s, but still today, this is the most relevant hospital in Italy for oncological care and leukemia, specifically for children. So it serves people not only and families not only living in the surroundings, but from all over the countries and very often also from abroad. Another relevant step was the creation of a newly built hospital. And again, in terms of dimension and managerial challenges, this was something huge because they were able to collect enough resources as an association. So to build a new hospital from the scratch, it took 10 years, but finally they managed to do that. So again, another step is that this allowed them also to have an international perspective. So in the last period of their existence, again, the mission changed a bit. So they started with palliative care and having a voice. Then their focus was on obtaining the existence of a pediatric unit specialized on oncological care and then an hospital. And now they are really oriented to international excellence in terms of research. And last year, they obtained also the recognition from the Italian Ministry of Health to be the National Research of Excellence in their field. And these allow them to have access to extra resources and so on and so forth. So in red here, I've added, sorry, something appeared on my screen. I hope that it doesn't, that it still allow you to see the screen properly. But in red, I highlighted here which are the main issues that emerge phase after phase. So at the beginning, what put the association together, the people of the association together, and also what was the big challenge for them was to have the definition of their mission and also to find the common goal to bring individual willingness to be part of the association into something more structured and organized. So this idea of having an alignment between individuals and the collective expectation. And this happened because they were a bottom-up organization, also involving people that were passing through a very hard period of their life. And so the struggle between individual experience and the experience of the group of families, the group of parents, were something pretty important and relevant, and also with some consequences on the relation with the external stakeholders. After that, they became more structured. So it started a period of the institutional partnership, and they were able to obtain, thanks also to the extraordinary abilities and capacity of the people being part of the association, they were able to move from a group of individuals to an association being able to have negotiation power and build institutional partnership. And this happened because they had a structured team, they defined a governance, and also this allowed them to shift their mission from advocacy to direct management of service delivery. And this, in the fourth phase, becomes something really clear when they create different business units, one for research, one for the care and hospital care. So the service production focus became dominant. And also they here, the challenge was to be able to balance different activities, but still keep the role of the family central, and so continue balancing the individual expectation with the idea of managing an hospital and a directly managed hospital also in the subsequent phase. When they opened to the international arena, also in terms of research, again, they had another big jump in terms of dimension. So again, the dimensional growth was something that pushed another change in the organization they had, and again, in the competencies that should be included within the association. So to generalize this story, we can see this path from we can divide this in three main steps, not to be that specific and not to rely too much on the story of their comitado that is really specific and also really connected with a time where it was built. So back in the 80s, healthcare sector was completely different from today. So something that happened back in the 80s is not possible today. And also some problems that existed back in the 80s are very likely not here today. But if we try to generalize this story, we can see that from being a small association to be the biggest pediatric research hospital in Italy, we can find three big steps. So at the beginning, we have the early stage association, where the focus was really on creating an identity and a common mission between the individuals. So here I've tried to put down the questions that possibly every organization, every association that is in this stage should go through. So here the discourse and the effort of the individual is around defining which is the core objective of the association. What can we do and what we want to do, and bringing together the two items, the willings and also the ability and capabilities of the association is something that can be difficult at the beginning. So we have some expectation, also some ambition, but also at the beginning, we are a small group of people, parents here, patients in other situations. So we have to manage and find a balance between these two things. And also another thing to balance, again, is diverse and possibly conflictual objectives, given that each individual taking part of the association can contribute differently and also can be in a different point of life with different needs. So what characterizes this phase is really a group of individuals that have to put together and balance competencies, objective, expectation, and also distribute specific tasks and different level of involvement. Then the second phase was and is oriented more in general to pass from an unstructured group of people to a building an organization that hopefully is a strong organization. So we need to find some ways on how to support this shift. And in their specific case, the direct management and service provision, so the idea that they were responsible not only of the advocacy, but also of the direct provision of care, was something that was really crucial and central in identifying the correct organization and way of managing everything. And here the issue of staffing and competencies is crucial, because when you start managing an hospital, you also have to guarantee some specific competencies. In their case, it was managing an hospital. For other association, it can be providing home care or providing other typologies of services. So again, the core elements here are building a strategic view, but in a different sense from phase one, because it should be more rooted in our organization here. So we need formal managerial bodies, we need formal partnership, we need contracts. So this part should be added. And then we have the fourth phase, that is characterized by growth, but the question here, how to grow while remaining committed to the regional core values. So how to guarantee that the stakes and the initial mission still is there and is present when we enlarge our mission and also our dimension. So the idea is that we have built a strategic position in the phase before, but now we have to consolidate the managerial competencies, the strategic positioning, and also define an appropriate governance model that allow also the representativeness of the individual and all the partners in this new and big organization. So this three step can be seen in two ways. From one, we can see them as an evolution, so with the idea that you start from one and you achieve number three, but also we can see this as a continuum. So the message I want to pass is not that each association at one day should or must become something managing an hospital, like in the case I've told you, absolutely not. The idea is that we can have different positioning on this continuum. So, and it depends on the mission and on the final expectation of the association. The point is that it should be clear which should be the arrival point in time, since each of the three different steps has different implications from three perspectives: managerial competencies, the partnership that should be achieved, and also the values things. So to conclude, some possible take-homes: we need different managerial competencies for each of these three positioning that are more focused on creating trust and having a voice in phase one, building the strategies in the model 2, or having control and resources and being able to plan and control and do the operation on the 4 model. We should build partnership differently, considering where we are. And again, if we are more oriented on trust and having individuals that collaborate one with the other, so the model 1, we should look for a strategy as an association, and considering where you want to arrive, the strategy should be different and supported by different competencies. But the point is that you should find a way to ensure that these strategies, the implemented strategies, is aligned with the value that the association and the single individual part of the association want to promote. And this is my conclusion.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. What an interesting story. And so to see what was an organization of parents originally transformed into something that today is managing a hospital and transforming the lives of 550 children a year is really exceptional. Thank you for taking us through some of those stages. I just wonder, if you were giving advice to an organization today, and it sounds like stage 1 was you put in, you need to have an identity and clarity on your mission. And I suppose this is an interesting point for patient organizations, because often what they come together for is mutual support. And then they realize there are other families in the same situation and they also need a bit of help. And they go through a path from, we want to support each other in this current situation, to, there are others out there, we need to support them, and then possibly they go further. What would you give as advice at that very first stage, where you go from, we're supporting ourselves through a very hard time, to we're going to support others and we want to transform the health system or the society outside? That really big leap. Take us through those first 3 steps.
Yeah, I think that the core point here is to be able to formalize and also be very explicit and define the perimeter that you can reach and you can cover. So especially at the beginning, when of the life of an association, where you have very strong commitment, a lot of passion, maybe also a lot of energy and time to dedicate because it's something new, something you really believe in. So it's very often happen that you go really beyond what you can really guarantee and do for the association. And as an individual, you can push hard, maybe for sometimes maybe weeks, months here, but it arrives a time where it's done and you have no more energy. So from shifting between we help each other and we help others outside our circle, so define how large should be this circle, so how many others you can help and which is your objective, and also be really transparent with yourself and with the association in terms of what you can achieve in concrete terms, because I've seen a number of associations that just decide to close their experience because they understood too late that they have pushed too harder on the initial group of the constituents of the association, and then they have no more energy to donate to the association.
Thank you. I think that's really good advice, is, stay true to the mission and maintain the passion, but find a way of also respecting the limits and understanding that you will hit a wall, there will be burnout, and to stop before that. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I know that your presentation was really interesting, but for the audience, they can find your presentation and all the presentations from the summit on the left-hand side of their screen. They'll see there's a little thing you can click, the called resources, and we've put loads of great stuff in there that people can download and use. So thank you very much, Elisabetta, for sharing with us this fascinating story of how a group of families now runs, this incredibly large and successful children's hospital serving the community and so many different families. And most importantly as well, leading research. I think that was interesting. It wasn't just the 50 families a year that get care, but they are doing cutting edge research that supports families in other parts of Italy and beyond. So thank you. It was a really great story. Let me now introduce a panel of experts who are going to share their experience. And I'd like to introduce Mark Baines, who's the co-founder and vice president of HeartLife Foundation in Canada. He's got up very early in the morning to be with us today, and he's going to share the story of his organization. His organization is small, but it has huge ambitions. And he's going to share with us how you can achieve big changes, even if you don't necessarily have a large size. I also have John Barrack, who's joining us from the Stroke Alliance for Europe, that's called SAFE, and he's the ex-CEO of the UK Stroke Association. So he's got a huge range of experience of being on boards of large organizations, so one that had 800 staff and 10,000 volunteers, but he's also helped lead startups and assisted small organizations to get going, so he can give advice across that broad range. And finally, I have Magdalena Decor, who's the chief executive of FH Europe, which is a smaller association that's been put together to work across Europe. So again, dealing with different membership organizations. So Mark and John and Magdalena, welcome, and thank you. Now, what we've agreed to do now is have a free-flowing discussion about a range of different issues that an organization might come across on its development. And Elisabetta very nicely set out for us some of the stages that organizations go through. But perhaps we could start with that first one. At what point should you go official? At what point do you say, our mailing group, our WhatsApp group, our sort of parents who meet for coffee while our kids are having treatment, we should take the leap to become a legal entity because there's things we want to do? What are the things that you should have in place? Elisabetta said clearly that it's about your identity and your mission. Mark, can I invite you to answer on that? How did you decide to say, we're going to create something?
Yeah, no, thank you. And Elisabetta, thank you for the amazing presentation. There's a lot of similarities between that organization and how HeartLife came to be here in Canada. And I think from our perspective, that leap occurred when we had defined that core mission and those values that we hold. Similar to what happened in Italy, there was a need that we discovered. There was no organization present fulfilling that need. We said, how can we support folks living with heart failure? And we've stuck to that mandate. And really, it was that point where we said, okay, there's 650,000 Canadians living with heart failure. Jillian and I were the only two people with lived experience at a national roundtable to talk about heart failure. And that's when we decided that we need to make that leap to an organization to help support other Canadians living with the disease.
Thank you. John, let me bring you in on this because I know that you've been at both ends of the scale, sort of large institutions, but also helping organizations take that first step. What needs to be put in place? What are the essential elements that are critical before you go down the route of saying, right, here's our statutes, let's go?
Well, of course, people come together because they have different drivers. For some people, they may have been relating to a medical system, as Elisabetta's example was, where they felt it was letting them down or not doing something in the way that it should be done. And they're almost starting from an advocacy type position. But there are other people who are coming together because either they've been patients or they have been caring and supporting someone who has a medical condition. And what they're really interested in is maybe offering peer-to-peer support or dealing with other things, because not everything is directly about advocating to the medical system. So some people might be having finance problems, other people problems with work because of what's happened to them or whatever. And I think that when you've got people coming together, with slightly different perspectives on why they're coming together and what they want to do. That's your first job, to actually sort out, as Elisabetta said, what is our crucial mission? What are we actually getting together to do? And then after that, I think it's about volume of people. It's about the capacity of people to do so much. So, for instance, in the stroke world, it's been very difficult to start up small organisations because people who've had a stroke are quite chronically disabled in many ways, and they haven't got the energy or whatever to get going. So you also need the capacity and all of those things. But within each country, there will be legal requirements if you want to start raising money. If you want to start advocating as a group, there might be limitations on what you can actually do unless you're a legal body. Access to information and all sorts of things. Sometimes organisations are more important in terms of getting this sort of thing than individuals. So all of those things come to play a part in what sort of organisation you're going to put together, how you're going to create it. Do you want it to be a free-forming group of people, or do you need to make it legal? And what are your longer-term aims? You know, if you're going to have some longer-term aims, you probably do need to set up some sort of legal body to work on those things over a period of time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Magdalena, maybe I could bring you in to talk a little bit, to take the conversation a bit further. John was talking to us about things like you've got to decide, you know, what it is you want to achieve. Can we now start to touch a little bit on this issue of governance, you know, which is how do you make sure you've got the right people and the right skills to get that balance? I mean, I've sat in small NGOs and we have to work out who's good at figures, who's prepared to be the treasurer, and who's prepared to do all the secretariat work of the meetings and everything else. So can you give us a sense of your first steps in governance?
Absolutely, and thank you. I wanted to maybe first say how much I appreciated Elisabetta's presentation. I think it should be almost like a go-to a case study for anyone who wants to be inspired and grow. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's extremely important to understand first how FH Europe specifically came together, and I wanted to maybe use this opportunity and tell the audience we are a network. It's a loose network of patient organizations across Europe. What we have all in common is the mission, and that's to basically identify people who live with inherited lipid conditions that might cause premature cardiovascular disease. So it was in its first stage, it was an organization that was created by leaders of patient organizations who realized at some point that what they need is a platform to exchange best practices and support each other. So it was leader to leader, peer to peer support at that level, and to advocate on a European level. And that was in 2015. Fast forward to 2019, we had a bit of a transformation, and basically from initial creation of the governance and the board, where it was purely volunteer-based, purely from among the participants and the volunteers who were already running their respective organizations in their countries, who were already pretty much overloaded with running organization on the national level, stepping up and trying to run a pan-European organization. So obviously this model was very good at the initial stage and leveraging, as you mentioned, everyone's skills, capacities. Someone had legal background, someone knew the numbers, just as you said. But as the organizations evolve, so needs the governance and the composition of the board. And so in 2019, we had that restructure, and we were looking, where do we want to go next? And how can we identify those people? And we are now in 2020, almost 3, and we're gearing up for a new transformation of the organization, changing its legal status and moving from a charity to a foundation. And that again calls for refresh on what are the core values, how do we want to deliver, and how do we are fit for purpose for the future. And let's not forget, the past 3 years have been unprecedented in terms of pandemic, 3 years of healthcare overall challenges, and we had to respond to that, and we were not initially built for this. Add to it, specifically in Europe, the war and the crisis when it comes to public health, it's huge. So I think now, having learned from those experiences and participating in sessions like today's, we also recognize to think more towards the future and building a fit-for-purpose organization.
Great, thank you very much. And a reminder to the audience, if you have a question to Elisabetta or members of our panel, please use the Q&A function and we'll bring them in and put those questions to our board. And now let's pick up, we've touched a little bit on the issue of governance, but can I come back, John, to pick up on this issue of trustees and boards? Magdalena's talked about, transforming in a time of change and realizing that, you need a new structure and a new form to deliver different things. But how important are the right set of people as trustees and boards and giving them a clear mandate?
Yes, I suppose that there's a big issue in that when you're starting off, you probably don't want to be having a big board, but you do want to bring in people who can help with various things, because there's going to be a group of people who are quite enthusiastic about taking things forward. And you know how it is, you're in the room and you're saying, hey, does anybody know how to fundraise? Look, we really like to talk to the healthcare administrator. Does anybody know anybody who could do anything like that? And I think that at the very early stage, that's almost where you're beginning to define a group of volunteers who could not only participate, but can maybe also come together as a board to actually share their knowledge and their expertise about how an organisation can gradually be built and taken forward together. And so in many small organisations, you're going to be starting off with a board that have the onerous task of not only governing the organisation, but doing a lot of the work as well themselves. As things get bigger, though, and maybe you get to a point where you've had to appoint some people to do some of the work, you have to start asking the question, who manages the people who you've brought in to do the work? And that's really where the importance of a board begins to come in, because it's not about directly managing those people. It's about making sure that the enthusiasms of the staff that you've got don't take them into dead-end zones or things that the organisation was never set up to do in the first place. So you're trying to make sure that the people who are working in the organisation are still pursuing what the strategy of the organisation is, rather than maybe doing some of the things that they find particularly interesting. And what I just would say, thinking about Elisabetta's sort of model, where there was a bit of a line where you're going from your identity, creation of your mission, to putting all the blocks in place to chase that mission, and then growing the organisation according to those things. It was a bit of a straight line, isn't it? But in actual fact, as organisations begin to develop and grow and you get a board and so on, you reach a point where you actually say, well, that first mission, we seem to have done quite a lot of that. So what is it that we need to do next? And in a sense, what you're getting into is a circle where you look at your mission and you have to look at it every, 6 years, 7 years, depending on what you are. If you're growing really fast, maybe even, more quickly than that, and go through those 3 stages, as it were, on a fairly regular basis. And it can be quite interesting, because people who set up an organisation sometimes really resist a change that needs to be made, because maybe the healthcare systems change, maybe funding mechanisms have changed, maybe they started off in an organisation which was to help working age or young people, but all of those people have got older. And now the organisation has got a mismatch between the people who were in it originally and what they were doing and what the mission is. So, all of these things have to be reconsidered all the time. And for that, you really do need a board of people who can sit down and talk together and say, are we on track? Is this what we want to do?
Thank you. And I saw that, all of our panel nodding as you were explaining some of these challenges, particularly as an organisation outgrows the original urgency and need that was created. So the role of the board or trustees in ensuring transparency, accountability, and I think that's also quite important. I know you had a great session on fundraising yesterday, but one of the key aspects for fundraising, and I'm sure Elisabetta will have mentioned that in her presentation, is you've got to have decent accounts. It's got to be clear that there's value for money before you can bring money in to grow. And if we looked at that example of the hospital, at different points, they got entrusted with very big missions. So the main hospital, donated a whole building. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't have absolute confidence that the organisation was capable of managing effectively the services and the structure. So I think that the role of the trustee and the boards to help align the strategy, but also give that credibility is really important. So maybe we can talk now about the growth stage. And I'll start, Mark. Can I come to you, because one of the questions we wanted to know is it possible for an organisation to increase its impact without increasing its footprint, in other words, its offices and its staff, etc.? Does there always need to be a direct relationship between we're this size, therefore we can operate at this field, or can you mismatch it and say, actually, we can be small and have a big impact? I know that's close to your heart.
Yeah, no, it is, and the answer is yes. And it's a daunting task to think that with the same team, can you double, triple, or 10 times your impact as an organization? HeartLife started with Jillian, myself, and Dr. Sean Varani in a hotel lobby in 2016 because there was a need. Our core team is still myself, Jillian, and Dr. Sean Varani, and we continue to grow. I would say for the first 2 to 3 years, we really leveraged our team of champions and volunteers, people living with heart failure, who had the same idea for advocacy, for support, for mechanisms across the country. In the last 2.5 to 3 years, we leveraged our partnerships, our multi-stakeholder partners, not just in health systems, but industry partners, government relationships, researchers, to really leverage HeartLife from a regional organization to a national and global organization. I think about our relationship with the Global Heart Hub, how we sit on the Global Advocacy Heart Failure Group, as well as we participate in global meetings. We're able to use this to learn, to develop, to share resources. And really, I think that's how organizations who remain small are able to have a big impact, is to leverage resources, to build partnerships. Look at other folks that have skills in areas that you might not have skills in, right? Join communities like this where you're able to understand from other folks, how can we properly fundraise as a small organization? How can we work with partner groups across the world to build our momentum? Or how can we work within our countries with, say, we're a heart failure organization, but we work with a group that focuses on cardiac rehab because that's not our specialty. We work with a group that focuses on mental health. That's not our specialty. But cardiac rehab and mental health all have associations with heart failure. So how do we work together to grow? And really, that's what we've done as an organization in the last 2 years to really amplify our voice, I think, both nationally and globally. And I think that's where organizations sometimes have that fear. They don't think that they can build those partnerships. But if you just start talking to folks, you'll understand that there's a lot of the same need out there. And then everything we do, of course, comes back to our mandate on how do we educate, empower, and engage folks. And as long as you stick to that core value, as Elisabetta mentioned in her presentation, is it coming back to the core values, you'll continue to grow.
Thank you, Mark. At this point, I'd like to bring in one of the questions that we've had submitted in advance. And Elaine Gallego Diaz Canseco is from an organization called EPOVAC. And she's got a question for us that I think and we could really explore together. She says, look, 50% of small businesses don't survive 5 years. And the biggest problem they deal with is, number one, there's no market need. Number two, they don't have enough money. And number three, they don't have the right people. Now, a patient organization, how do we avoid that trap? The market need is there. There's clearly a need for patient organizations. So how do we make sure that we have the right funding and the right people to take it forward? And I'd like everyone on the panel to see what you could say on that. Mark, you were nodding, so maybe you could take the first bite at this one.
Yeah, it's a big trap. I come from a business background, and I know the statistic very well. I think that number is probably maybe closer to 80, 90%. And it's key. It's continuing to evolve as a organization. I mean, we focus on heart failure, of course, but not just the disease specifically. We look at it from a very holistic approach. And then again, we go back to focusing on our mandate in terms of educating, engaging, and empowering folks. And then it's really understanding the community. So instead of us, myself, Jillian, having our own mandate, we went out to our national stage, to our champions, and said, what are the needs for Canadians living with heart failure? And the problems were immense, and they were common. And then again, it's looking at the priorities, I think, of your partners and your stakeholders and aligning with them, because you can't go alone. I think, there's a proverb that we think about: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And so if you align with priorities of your partners, especially as a small organization, then you're able to keep this momentum going and ultimately survive past this 5 years. I mean, we're at our now, I think, 6th year actually. So we crossed that hurdle, and now it's
congratulations. You're out of the pit of despair.
Yeah,
where many organizations fail.
Exactly, and it's looking for the next 5-10 years, and ultimately, I think a goal of all organizations should be to have a hospital wing donated to them. So that's going to be the next mission.
Elisabetta, you've clearly inspired us all. Can I invite you to see how would you respond? How could a patient organization avoid falling into that trap of not having the right people or money in order to go to the next level?
Yes, following on something that Mark was explaining before. So I think that one common problem that should be added here for the association is being alone. So, okay, cash and resources is an issue and people are an issue, but I think that many associations just continue thinking that they are self-sufficient. So not looking for partnership and not looking for external resources is one of the problems at the beginning of the life of the organization. So remaining alone, not seeing that this is not an opportunity and you're not self-sufficient, this is a big problem. So
thank you. Magdalena, can I invite you to also respond on that? You've been through the process of completely revising what you're doing and thinking about going forward. And you mentioned that it is a new structure and going from an NGO to a foundation. How did you avoid falling into that trap, making sure you had the right funding and people for the next step?
How honestly do we intend to share on this session? I can tell you, January 2020, we were in a very bad shape with no prospect of funding, just entering lockdowns and all our sponsors pulling out, and everyone fighting their own corner to survive, and basically bringing back the community together from around Europe and saying, how can we just focus on what is really important for us, surviving this tough unknown period and building relationship. And I think this basically brought trust back into the community that we have each other. And as phony as it sounds, it was the most important element that happened in our community, and that restored the trust of sponsors. And I'm just going to echo what everyone else has said. It's expanding beyond your usual suspects and having completely unusual and entering uncharted territories. We are now partnering with organizations that nobody looked at, but we thought, this is the way forward. This is scaling up our reach, our outreach, and tackling the problem at scale, and that basically demonstrating the innovation, the courage, but also having the commitment to deal with unmet needs. And today, I think I can proudly say that we are no longer in a difficult situation financially, but similarly to my colleagues on this call, we have big aspirations and big problems to tackle. So funding is obviously something that we will continuously need. And this is one of the reasons, as I said earlier, we are moving now as a foundation to a different country, so we can tackle new, we can tap on new funding streams. But that happens in respect and remembering the ultimate mission and our members, because the strength is really in our community together internationally.
Thank you, Magdalena. Yes, I think let's move a little bit now to look at this issue of volunteers, because we've all touched on them, that, you know, volunteers, they're the people who have the expertise and the ideas and the skills, but there are pros and cons of working with volunteers. Volunteers are fantastic. You know, they give you absolutely everything. And volunteers are a nightmare to manage because they're volunteers, they drop out, they want to do something different. So let's try and unpick this a little bit. And John, let me start with you, because I know you've run 10,000 volunteers. So can you just take us through pros and cons, and how do you make sure you're getting the best out of the people who are willing to do something for you?
Okay, well, I think one of the first things to think about is you've got to balance your question, what is it that volunteers can do for us, by the question, what is it that we're going to do for them? Because, you know, I think that this comes back to the previous question from Elena. You've got to go after the right sort of people. You want the right sort of resources in terms of the volunteers who are coming through and skills. But, you know, they're not going to just come along and do something for nothing. There's lots of organisations who people could go and volunteer for. There's lots of people who would like to do something, but some only want to do an hour a week. Others want to actually do something 5 days a week and put it down on their CV so they can get a good job later on with a different organisation. So the first thing you've got to think about is, what are we doing for volunteers to attract them? What is it that is going to be fulfilling and meaningful in terms of what we offer people? So I would say, do not sort of say that we're going to give them all the really horrible things to do that nobody who's paid would ever want to do. And then you wonder why, after 3 hours of being with you, they say, I don't think this is for me, I'm going to go and do something else. I think that's a starting point. And, you know, to get into the heads of volunteers, you've got to think about the different segments of people that there are, young people, middle-aged people, older people. What is it that they want from their volunteering experience? Well, some people will go into volunteering because they believe in the cause, but that maybe they also want to make friends, or maybe they want to meet a partner, or maybe they want to rub shoulders with government ministers and do things. So, you know, people are motivated in a million different ways. So my first thing would be, don't ever have just one job description for volunteers. You need a whole raft of different things that can be offered to volunteers so that they can pick, oh, I'd love to do that. Some people just want to work with whatever your client group is. Other people may not want to work with the client group. They might want to be doing fundraising, other exciting things like organising sponsored whatever, this or that. Let them do it. Don't dovetail people into things they don't want to do. But all this does mean that you have to, if you're going to take on volunteers, think about it seriously. Who's going to manage them? Who's going to make sure that there's a duty of care towards the volunteers so you look after them properly? Who's going to make sure that those volunteers can reflect their good experiences into your social media to attract other people? It's a whole raft of stuff you have to put together around volunteers. And once you start getting quite a lot of volunteers, it's a big management task to look after all those volunteers. So I've been in organisations where there are people who are from managerial roles who've retired, who come in and they use the managerial skills to manage other volunteers who are actually doing stuff for the organisation. So think a little bit outside the box, think about what you can do for the volunteers, and think about how you're going to recruit them. And then hopefully over time, you'll build up expertise in the organisation and more people will come through.
Thank you, John. You've actually answered really well a question that we had submitted from Ruth Biller, who's the chair of the European Patient Advocacy Group, ARVC, because she'd asked, how do you find other volunteers who are committed in a long-term and sustainable way? And I think you've said very clearly, don't look at them as cheap, no-cost labour. Think about what you can offer and what they get out of it, how to match their motivation and therefore their skills and the organisation. So that was very nice. Does anyone else, because volunteering is really in the sort of DNA of patient organisations, is there anyone else in the panel who might like to comment on how you manage and deal with volunteers? Mark, do you have, you've talked about having a couple of small hardcore group of people who did it. Do you have large numbers of volunteers?
We do, and we wouldn't be an organization without our volunteers, and we wouldn't have the success we have without our volunteers and champions. And it's really supporting them along the way. Heart failure, of course, has ups and downs throughout your diagnosis, and it's really understanding the capacity of our volunteers, not overcommitting folks, not ensuring that there's no burnout, and really, again, supporting them throughout the process and keeping a good level of understanding. And that really will drive success.
Thank you. And just for the last few minutes of our session, I'd like us to explore a little bit about the issue of credibility. How do you, you created your organisation, now you need to have an impact externally. So how do you create credibility? How do you make sure that you are taken seriously, that you're given a seat at the table when there is other organizations there and be taken seriously? And I think that's something that I'll ask you all, but maybe could I come back to Elisabetta? From your experience, you gave us an example over a long period of time, but let's assume we don't have 40 years to build our credibility. Are there 2 or 3 things that you could say that are key to an organization's credibility?
Okay, it's hard to select some, but I think I would start with accountability and transparency. So you build your credibility if you're able to show the results you have achieved and to show it as in a consistent way through time and also with some numbers. So do not undervalue the value of number, being able to provide some numbers about the activities, the people you are doing something for. I think that this helps a lot. And then a second issue can be to look for strong local connection. So you might need the credibility at institutional political level, but you should build the root of this credibility in your community, so within your community. So again, being consistent with your community, being trustworthy to them, be present. I think that then give you the energy also to be credible at different level.
Thank you. Magdalena, if you could think about one piece of advice that you could give the audience about, when they're thinking about growing and professionalizing their organizations, what's the one good piece of advice they need to bring out in dark times when they've got to think about things?
I've been thinking about it quite a lot, and I think we've been all talking about the good stuff, but I think it's one piece of advice based on my experience is that failures and mistakes are part of the success. It's not the fact that we make them, but what we learn and how we build on them. I know that my other peers will say a lot of very positive and inspiring things, but I would like to take this opportunity and not underestimate the value of certain mistakes and failures or changing along the way. It's part of the growing journey.
Thank you. And it's painful, isn't it, growing? But you need to go through that in order for a new shape and a new structure, a new vision to emerge. Mark, let me give you the opportunity. What would be the sort of one thing you want the audience to take away? We've got this very important reality check from Magdalena saying, we have to accept there'll be difficult times as well as good times, and we've got to be able to hold through that and hold the vision. What's the one piece of advice you'd like to give people?
I think there will be challenges, yes. As a small organization, even more so, as you strive to grow. But look at leveraging partnerships to support your growth. There's so many groups out there doing so many great things that are willing to support you. So look at what's been developed, adapt it for your regional or local area. And then really, again, as HeartLife does, work with your volunteers and champions, stick to your core mandate, as Elisabetta said in her initial presentation, and don't fear your ultimate goals, right? I mean, set them and strive towards them.
Great, thank you. That's very good advice. Look for partners, stay with your goal, but find, don't be frightened of having ambition. John, what would you most like the audience to think about?
Well, I think you've got to put yourself in a situation where you can't be ignored. And there are many ways of doing that. We've talked about alliances, building partnerships, being part of networks. But, when I'm after something, I'm probably a little bit selfish. You get involved in a lot of those things, not only because they're good, but because you hope that when you put the call out, those people are going to actually stick their logo on your stuff, and they're going to actually talk to the key gatekeepers, whoever they are, and say, hey, that John Barrican and SAFE are a really good organization. You ought to listen to them. And of course, the other thing is, which we should really keep at the center of all this, is how do you mobilize patient power? Because, you can go along and you can say, I think this, I think that, but it's so much more powerful if you can say, there are 100,000 people who are experiencing this every year. And if you look at the social media, you'll see that many of them are writing in, supporting exactly what we're saying and all the rest of it. So, you're going to try and mobilize both patients and medics. I've always found to not be ignored. See if you can get some really prominent medics to come into the meetings with you, to actually do the advocacy alongside. Patients and doctors united together for better healthcare. It's a very powerful message, both to the decision makers and to the media. And the decision makers need to know that you are going to talk to the media about how it went. So they better try and make sure that they don't ignore what you're saying.
John, I can see why you are such an experienced operator at these things, and that's a great advice to to partner up with medical societies, leading healthcare professionals, to see if they will extend their shield of credibility and political capital towards what you want to achieve. So that was great advice, and I'd like to say a warm thank you to this panel, to Elisabetta for that really great case study, to Mark, to Magdalena, and to John. Thank you very much for your advice on how to grow and professionalize patient organizations. We're about to go into a break, but then I need to explain to you what's going to happen next. I'm just going to share my screen and I can show you what we're going to be doing next. So after the break, we're going to be having 5 separate different workshops, and I'd like to show you what they are and how to choose them. So what you need to do is you can see that on your screen, you'll have an option, and there are sort of choices, and you can choose which one to go to on, focus on, and that shows you whether you want to be looking at heart failure, shared decision-making in heart valve disease, a brighter future for cardiomyopathy patients, launching a global cholesterol action plan, or women and cardiovascular disease. So you select that, and that's where you go to after the break, because there'll be parallel sessions. And just as a reminder, that there are so many different other resources that we've put together on this website. So you'll find resources, you'll find the agenda, the main stage. So just to encourage you, the just one thing, we just had a fantastic session full of lots of good advice. If you click on the just one thing and tell us what your big takeaway is, the headline message that you'd like to share. So thank you all, and we will see you in 10 minutes.